The lobby of Maddox and Vale gleamed like a temple, glass, chrome, marble polished to a blinding shine. A place designed to make outsiders feel small. I didn't belong yet, but I would. I arrived exactly 7 minutes early, holding a navy leather folder. Inside was a resume I didn't need, they'd already offered the job. Entry-level administrative assistant. Mostly answering phones, they said. Don't expect much. The receptionist, Ava, didn't look up. Sit there, she muttered, nodding toward a bench like she was doing me a favor. I sat and waited, legs crossed, hands folded, back straight. I was watched, ignored, dismissed, all at once. 30 minutes passed before someone finally came to fetch me. Carla. Executive assistant to Damien Vale. He hates being kept waiting, she said with a thin smile. I wasn't late, I replied. Doesn't matter. Damien Vale didn't stand when I entered his office. Didn't offer a handshake. Just glanced up with piercing blue eyes and an expression carved from boredom. You're the new girl? Yes. I'm honored to be here. He smirked. Don't flatter yourself. You'll be managing calendars, fetching coffee, booking lunch reservations. If you last a month, we'll talk. If not, I won't remember your name. I nodded. Understood. Good. Carla will show you where we keep the bottled water. I only drink Fiji. That was how it began. Damien Vale. Billion-dollar closer, real estate royalty, smug prince of the skyline. Brilliant, brutal, and convinced I was a nobody. He was half right. On paper, I was nothing. An assistant from a community college. Pretty, quiet, invisible. But that was the plan. I didn't come here to climb the ladder. I came to take the building. By the end of week 1, I had memorized every partner's name, every department head's favorite drink, and every investor's latest project. I learned the back-end systems, the vendor contacts, the printer codes. I studied Damien's emails, his schedule, his rhythm. I made no mistakes. Still, the humiliation came in waves. Didn't you go to some community college? He asked loudly during a morning meeting. No wonder you struggle with numbers. Sorry, I murmured. Next time you bring espresso, try not to burn the beans, he said the following day, tossing the cup in the trash. Of course, I replied. Every insult was filed away. Not just in memory, but in purpose. They didn't know that behind closed doors, I was holding late-night calls with corporate lawyers and financial strategists. That I'd spent the last year building shell companies and offshore trusts. One in the Caymans. One in Singapore. Another quietly registered through a silent partner in Zurich. Every month, those shells acquired small blocks of Maddox and Vale shares. Clean, untraceable. By month 3, Carla started trusting me with more. She's efficient, she told Damien. Better than the last 5. She's quiet, he replied. But not stupid. Let's just hope she doesn't get any ideas. I smiled to myself. I already had plenty. On a Friday afternoon, Damien waved me into his office with 2 fingers, barely glancing up from his desk. Just signed the Pineshore deal. Client's getting a bottle of Dom as a thank you. You'll deliver it. Understood. Wear something tight. He's an old perv. Might help us get a better margin on the next project. I nodded. My hand stayed calm. My smile didn't falter. I delivered the champagne that evening, declined the client's invitation to come inside, and called my attorney on the way back. We're at 47%, she said. Push the rest next quarter. Quietly. Do it. On Monday, I returned to my desk as usual. Damien passed by and flicked a note at me. New lunch order. Don't screw it up this time. I picked it up and smiled. Because while he mocked my coffee runs and forgot my name, I was already halfway to owning him. Damien Vale believed he was untouchable. At Maddox and Vale, he operated like a king, arrogant, sharp, with just enough charm to make clients swoon and rivals fold. His empire ran on control, and I was just another servant in the palace. But while he sharpened his swagger and bragged about conversions per square foot, I quietly reshaped the map beneath him. By month 5, I knew the firm better than most of its VPs. I knew who was embezzling, who was sleeping with who falsified closing numbers to maintain rank. I wasn't spying. I was preparing. Meanwhile, Damien continued his daily rituals of condescension. You breathe too loud when I'm on the phone, he snapped one morning. Ever considered just not existing during important calls? Of course, I replied. Noted. On Thursdays, I delivered his weekly grooming products to his apartment. On Fridays, I scheduled his after-hours massages. When he got caught yelling at a junior broker during a walkthrough, I was the one who smoothed over the PR damage. I did it all with a smile. Because every moment he spent thinking I was harmless bought me another inch of power. One of my shell corporations, Opal Meridian Holdings, had just finalized its latest acquisition, 3% of Class B shares, purchased quietly through a proxy bidding group. A second entity moved another 2% from a retiring partner who thought he was selling to a tech firm out of Texas. I didn't need to be seen. I just needed to be systematic. Carla began leaning on me more, handing over responsibilities she didn't want. Travel arrangements, broker reports, even minor client follow-ups. I handled each task flawlessly, watching as my access widened. They called me dependable. They meant invisible. I was neither. One day, while filing quarterly projections, I noticed a red-flagged document left open on Damien's monitor. He was in a meeting. I read it. Then I screen captured it. Then I traced the signature trail. It was a side deal, an offshore condo development signed under the table. Illegal, unreported, and messy. I didn't need to expose him. I just needed to keep the file. A card in my pocket. A safeguard. A weapon. By month 7, I held just under 51%. The final sliver came from a frustrated legacy partner who hadn't seen a dividend payout in 2 years. He wanted out. I gave him exactly what he wanted: cash, discretion, and silence. When the transfer was complete, I sat alone in my tiny assistant cubicle and stared at the confirmation email. I was now the majority shareholder of Maddox and Vale. I owned them. Damien passed by that same afternoon and dropped a stack of folders on my desk. Fix these projections. I can't believe even you could screw them up that badly. I looked up, steady. Actually, I didn't touch those. They came directly from finance. So? You're the one I pay to clean up their mess. No, I said, and this time I let the word sit. You don't pay me. He blinked, thrown. Excuse me? I smiled. Let me know when you're ready to discuss your employment agreement. It's due for review. He narrowed his eyes. What the hell are you talking about? I returned to my screen. Check your inbox. He walked away, muttering something under his breath. Minutes later, I heard his door slam. 10 minutes after that, Carla came out pale and tight-lipped. What did you do? She asked. I tilted my head. Just moved a few things around. I spent the rest of the day organizing my files. Not my assistant duties, my internal briefings. By the following week, my lawyer had filed all relevant ownership disclosures with the state and board. There would be no going back. No hiding. And still, Damien hadn't called a meeting. Hadn't said a word. But I knew. I knew he was watching now. For the first time, he wasn't the hunter. He was prey trying to understand what he'd missed. And the truth was, he missed everything. Because power doesn't come with titles or corner offices. It comes when no one's looking, until it's too late. The official board meeting was set for Tuesday 9 a.m. sharp. Damien entered the glass conference room like he always did. Late enough to signal importance, smug enough to own the space. His navy suit was tailored to perfection. His tie cost more than my monthly salary used to. But his eyes flicked toward me with something unfamiliar. Wariness. There were 9 people seated around the table. Partners, legal counsel, department heads. I was at the far end, in a plain gray sheath dress and a subtle diamond pin, one Damien had scoffed at months ago when I wore it to a holiday event. Trying too hard, he'd said. He didn't say that now. He sat down, clicked his pen, and began. Before we get into Q3 projections, I'd like to address a rather puzzling development. He looked around the room, then settled on me. It appears our quiet little assistant has been doing more than fetching coffee. I met his gaze, calm. You're referring to the change in shareholder structure. Exactly. Someone's been busy, he said, forcing a chuckle. The board deserves to know how this happened. The board already knows, I said evenly. The filings were submitted in accordance with state and federal law. All transfers were legal, reviewed, and signed by the appropriate parties. You used shell companies. That's not exactly transparent. It's legal. And effective. Silence stretched across the room. The managing partner, Mr. Lin, cleared his throat. Miss Grant, just to clarify, you now hold 51% of voting shares? 52, I corrected. We had a final sale close Friday. Damien leaned forward. So what? You bought your way into a seat at the table. That doesn't mean you get to run the firm. Actually, it does, I replied. Effective immediately, I'm invoking controlling interest. That includes oversight of executive decisions and departmental leadership. He laughed, bitter and sharp. You're joking. I'm not. You're an assistant. You have no experience leading a firm, let alone this one. That's true. But I've spent the last year watching how not to run it. Murmurs rippled down the table. Carla, seated beside Damien, shifted uncomfortably. You want his job? She asked, eyes narrowed. I don't want his job, I said. I want his authority. There's a difference. You don't know what you're getting into, Damien said, voice dropping. You think this is about money and signatures? This world eats people like you alive. That's what I was counting on, I said. Because while you were busy playing king, I was learning the terrain. I know every hole in your balance sheet, every off-the-book deal, every lawsuit you've buried with cash and NDAs. And I haven't said a word, yet. His jaw clenched. You wouldn't dare. Then don't give me a reason to. The board sat in silence, stunned. I continued. Effective today, I'm implementing an internal audit. All offshore contracts will be reviewed. Bonus structures will be revised. And any employee found engaging in fraudulent or unethical behavior will be terminated. I let that sink in before turning to Mr. Lin. We'll need new interim leadership while we restructure. I'd like to nominate Angela Ruiz to oversee operations temporarily. She's the only partner who hasn't tried to expense a yacht party in Dubai. That earned a few scattered chuckles, the nervous kind. Damien stood. You won't get away with this. I already have, I said. He walked out, shoulders tight, fists clenched. Carla followed seconds later, not bothering to close the door behind her. When the room emptied, I gathered my notes, stood, and walked to the head of the table. I sat in Damien's chair. It felt different now. Not like revenge. Like reality finally catching up. For a year, I'd been patient. For a year, I played the role everyone expected. Pretty. Quiet. Grateful. But now the mask was off. And the firm was mine. The shift was immediate. No more paper cups or cold sandwiches from the corner deli. No more being talked over, dismissed, forgotten. By Wednesday, my name was on every calendar invite. By Thursday, my initials were on every directive. The hallway whispers started almost overnight, half disbelief, half desperation. She's the assistant, right? Not anymore. You think Damien will come back? Not unless he wants to get sued into oblivion. I didn't fire him. That would have been too merciful. Instead, I froze his expense accounts, pulled his name from every public-facing document, and reassigned his key clients to brokers he used to mock. I removed his parking spot. Then I revoked his company access. Let him stew in the guest lobby like he made me do on day one. Carla sent me an email the next morning, requesting a meeting to discuss my role. I replied with one word, declined. Then I posted her position publicly. I wasn't being petty. I was being thorough. For years, this firm had run on ego and exclusion. Now it would run on precision and power. Mine. I hired new talent, people with sharp minds and zero entitlement. I brought in an audit firm so clean they'd scare a bishop. I replaced the espresso machine Damien loved with one that actually worked. And then I moved into his office. The view hadn't changed. But everything else had. I kept his chair. Not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder. Power built on arrogance will always rot from the inside. But power built in silence, calculated, patient, becomes unstoppable. The press caught wind by the end of the month. Anonymous assistant ousts billionaire exec, how one woman bought the company from under his feet. The interviews came flooding in. I declined most. I didn't need headlines. I needed results. Under my leadership, profits rose, lawsuits vanished, and investor confidence skyrocketed. For the first time in years, the firm ran lean and honest. Efficient. Ruthless in a new way. I'd turned their empire into a weapon, and pointed it exactly where it needed to go. Damien tried to push back once. Filed a complaint through a secondary board member claiming coercion and manipulation. It got dismissed in under 24 hours. I sent him a bottle of sparkling water with a single line handwritten on the card, I only drink Fiji. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. He knew. Everyone did. The assistant they ignored had become the architect of their new world. And she wasn't stepping down. Fall arrived in glass reflections. The city gleamed cooler and harder, mirroring the shift inside Maddox and Vale. The firm looked the same from the outside, but the current running through its veins had changed completely. The boys' club was disbanded. The closed-door deals? Terminated. The culture of fear and favoritism? Burned down to ash. I operated with surgical precision, not emotion. I didn't scream, didn't threaten, didn't gloat. I set deadlines, demanded clarity, and rewarded results. The brokers who used to flirt with me in elevators now stood when I walked in. The assistants who were once invisible like I had been started eating lunch in the conference room instead of in storage closets. I called it rebalancing. Others called it a coup. But the numbers didn't lie. 2 quarters into my reign, our valuation had climbed 18%, and our client renewal rate was the highest it had been in a decade. Some investors were wary. Others were thrilled. "She's unpredictable," one partner whispered during a dinner. "She's unstoppable," another corrected. But behind the glass walls and press-friendly statements, I was still keeping track. Every deal Damien Vale had ever signed. Every investor he'd manipulated. Every quiet scandal swept under the carpet by bribed attorneys and forged valuations. I had the receipts. All of them. I didn't use them, yet. Because power isn't in exposure. It's in the threat of it. That's what Damien never understood. He thought dominance meant crushing people out in the open. I knew real power was quieter. Colder. More permanent. Still, there were times I'd catch myself thinking about the beginning. About the way he looked at me that first day, bored, dismissive, superior. About how I smiled anyway, holding his schedule and his ego in the same breath. And now? He was nowhere. Rumor had it he tried to start another firm. Investors wouldn't touch him. He sent out glossy pitch decks, called in favors, name-dropped his past wins. But all roads led back to me. I didn't blackball him. I didn't have to. He did that all on his own. One day, he showed up in the lobby. Unannounced. Uninvited. Security called my office. "Damien Vale is downstairs. Says he wants to speak with you. Urgent." I stared at the phone. My reflection in the glass. Then I said, "Tell him I'm in a meeting." "Should we reschedule?" "No, should we, tell him when to come back?" "He'll figure it out eventually." I hung up. He didn't come back after that. That night, I walked through the empty office alone. My heels clicked softly on marble floors that used to intimidate me. I paused at my old cubicle. The corner where I used to sit, quiet and small. I'd kept it untouched. A reminder. Not of where I started, but of how they misjudged me. All of them. Damien Vale thought I was a pretty face with decent typing speed. The others thought I was lucky, sneaky, ruthless. They were all wrong. I wasn't lucky. I was inevitable. Winter brought sharp winds and sharper headlines. From desk to dynasty, how one woman rewrote the rules of power. The fall of Damien Vale, and the rise of Madison Grant. My name was everywhere. Madison Grant, formerly assistant to the CEO. Now the CEO. The majority shareholder. The woman who took down the golden boy of real estate without ever raising her voice. I didn't ask for the spotlight, but I didn't shy from it either. When I finally agreed to a press interview, the journalist leaned in halfway through and asked, "What made you do it?" I paused. "They taught me everything I needed to know," I said. The mistake was thinking I wasn't watching. I didn't need to say more. The message was clear. The firm became a case study at business schools. There were think pieces about succession, about disruption, about power dynamics in male-dominated industries. I let them speculate. Meanwhile, I turned my attention to the next phase, expansion. Not just into new cities, but into new models. Residential tech, global partnerships, virtual ownership platforms. I recruited hungry minds, not old names. I broke ties with legacy firms that had been leeching off Maddox and Vale for years. I made bold bets, and they paid off. But for all the noise, for all the headlines, the real victory wasn't in the profits or the interviews. It was in the silence. Damien Vale never returned. Not to the lobby. Not to the board. Not even to the city. The last I heard, he was living off the grid in Santorini, playing tennis with washed-up bankers and trying to convince himself it wasn't all gone. But it was. Completely. Irrevocably. Sometimes I'd walk past his old office door. I hadn't changed the nameplate. Not yet. Part of me wanted it there as proof. Not of what I took, but of what they gave away by not looking deeper. They never saw me coming. That was their failure. But I did. I saw myself clearly, every step of the way. From day one. From the lobby bench. From the moment he told me he wouldn't remember my name. He remembered it now. They all did. And I wasn't done. Spring arrived not with blossoms, but with signatures. I closed 3 major acquisitions in a single month, 2 boutique firms in Miami and 1 legacy firm in London that had been circling bankruptcy for years. I bought them clean, restructured their leadership, and folded them into a new division, Grant Real Capital. A name I didn't hide behind. A name I made sure everyone saw. Maddox and Vale was still intact, but the shift was undeniable. I was no longer just the firm's majority shareholder. I was the brand. The architects of old wealth began requesting meetings. Men who once wouldn't return my emails now sat in my conference room, offering partnerships they would have never imagined a year ago. And I listened. Polite. Calm. In control. I said yes to the ones who knew how to adapt. And I sent handwritten rejections to those who didn't, delivered in navy envelopes, just like the folder I carried my first day. It felt poetic. Poetic, but not personal. Because at this level, nothing was personal. Everything was strategic. Everything was war. Quiet war. I stopped calling it revenge a long time ago. Revenge is about proving something. What I was building now wasn't about anyone else. It was about what happens when you stop asking for power and start taking it. Still, sometimes I thought about Damien. About the way his world collapsed without a bang, just a slow, humiliating unraveling. He had reached out once, through his lawyer. A polite note. Would she consider a conversation? I'd smiled when I read it. Not because of the message, but because of the word he used. She. Not even Madison. Just a figure he couldn't face. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. I wasn't the assistant anymore. I was the empire. Late one night, standing in front of the massive windows in what had been his office, I watched the lights of the skyline he used to own flicker in the dark. My phone buzzed. A new investor had approved terms. Another green light. Another building. Another block. I locked the screen and stood still, watching the city reflect back my silence. I had come in through the front door with my head bowed. Now, every room opened before me. I didn't need to knock. I built the door. Summer marked 1 year. 1 year since I walked into Maddox and Vale as an assistant. 1 year since Damien Vale glanced at me and decided I was nobody. 1 year since I started quietly taking everything he thought was his. I didn't celebrate the anniversary with champagne or cake. I marked it with a signature. The final paperwork to fully absorb Maddox and Vale into Grant Real Capital. The name would be retired. The legacy erased. I signed the papers with the same pen Damien used to hand me with a smirk. The same pen I'd stolen back from his drawer the day I moved into his office. Small, deliberate acts. That was always the method. People outside the industry still whispered about the story. The assistant who bought out her boss. The pretty girl who played the long game. The silent assassin. But I wasn't interested in being a myth. I was building something real. By the time the merger completed, I had already secured our position in 2 new global markets. Tokyo. Berlin. The old firms couldn't keep up. They were still stuck in power lunches and press photos. I was rewriting how empires were made. No dynasties. No heirs. Just precision. And control. One morning, I walked past a junior broker arguing on the phone. She was maybe 22, frustrated, trying to manage a difficult client who kept calling her sweetheart. I waited until she hung up, flustered. She looked at me like she was about to apologize. You handled it, I said. Next time, tell him if he wants to deal with someone less qualified, I'll personally approve the downgrade. She blinked, then smiled. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just remember the feeling. Then build something from it. I kept walking. The younger women in the firm had started watching me. Not with fear, but with calculation. They understood now. Power wasn't something you waited for. It was something you engineered. I had no interest in being a mentor. I didn't need protégés. But I would leave blueprints. That was enough. On the night of the 1 year mark, I stayed late. Alone. The building was quiet. The skyline shimmered. I sat in my office, my name now etched in the glass. And looked down at the city that used to seem impossible. I thought about everything Damien had tried to be. Loud. Fearsome. Untouchable. And then I thought about everything I had become. Quiet. Relentless. Permanent. He had built a tower of mirrors. I had built a fortress of stone. In the end, he faded. I endured. I didn't need revenge. I didn't even need closure. Because the most devastating thing I ever did wasn't destroy him. It was prove I never needed him to begin with.